Welcome to this call-in edition of Just Ask Us, and a chance to talk to a pair of natural history experts about the birds flocking to your neighborhood. Dr. Drew Lanham, a certified wildlife biologist in Clemson University's Department of Forestry and Natural Resources, is joined in the studio with Clemson University naturalist Patrick McMillan, director of the South Carolina Botanical Garden and host of Expeditions with Patrick McMillan. Maybe you are still enjoying your hummingbird friends or wonder where some of your summer visitors have gone. Whatever your avian interest, you can call in today about the birds frequenting your feeders, whether they are year-round residents or visitors passing through on their way south. If you've got a question about a bird or some other natural history subject, we welcome your calls today. Just use our toll-free number to join the conversation. It's 1-888-539-8859. That's 1-888-539-8859. It's all yours, guys.
Thank you, and we're back. Here we are once again to talk birds and birding. My friend Patrick McMillan and I are back on the air after a little bit of a break, and this morning we have a special guest, Terry Allen, who is the owner of the For the Bird shop in Salem, South Carolina. Good morning, Terry.
Good morning, Drew. This is a great way to get together.
Yeah, it's an absolutely fabulous way to get together. You know, it's an absolutely fabulous time of year, Terry, to be here, to be talking birds and nature. And we'd like for our audience out there to rejoin us after a little bit of a hiatus and to talk to us about the birds they're seeing, their observations, or to ask us a question. And they can do that by calling our toll-free number to join the conversation. That number is 1-888-539-8859. That's 1-888-539-8859. They can call us up, ask us about birds, and we'll give them what we know. We'll give them the 411, Terry, on birds.
The different than the 911?
Yeah. Hopefully there are no emergency situations. We do sometimes run into emergency situations here, you know, cardinals into glass.
Yep.
That sort of typical. But the 411, the information about what's going on in their backyards, where they're traveling. We know we have a very active birding community in the upstate of South Carolina. We know that birding is extraordinarily popular, right? You know that from your store.
The store's getting more and more customers every day, too, which is fun.
So, Terry, I'm going to ask you to give us a little bit of your story. How did you come by this whole bird thing? Are you a birder from a long way back?
Yes, when I met my wife, I became a birder. No, I'm still a very backyard birder, a novice birder. My wife loves birds and fed birds, and so she got me interested in it. And so we'd feed them at the feeders, and I'd keep wondering what the heck they are. And by the time I'd look for a field guide to look it up to figure out what bird was there, the bird was gone.
Yeah.
So I figured that there's got to be a better way. And so I came up with a few inventions that would help me identify birds at my feeders. And that was about 20 years ago. And then I came up with the idea of putting decals on windows so that you could spot the birds and quickly look at the decals and identify that it was a cardinal or a nuthatch and a wren. And from there, I would walk outside in the backyard and wonder, what song is that? Listen to those gorgeous sounds, and I can't see them. How do you identify a song? Anyway, I'm not musically inclined. You are. You can identify any sound. You're amazing. So I couldn't. I didn't have an expert with me, and I got started by getting CDs and try to find the song on a CD, but they were 200 songs on there, and I couldn't figure out what was singing in the backyard and remembering it. So I came up with an idea that it'd be better if you could push a button and play a bird song. So it took 3 or 4 years, and then I developed the bird song identifier.
Yeah, instant bird.
It is.
It's instant bird song, and an innovation. They say necessity is the mother of invention.
That's what it was, yeah.
So what you did, Terry, is you hatched a plan, is what you did appropriately. And so it's a very useful tools. And so, part of what we're going to do this morning and for our hour of time is just have a conversation about our mutual love for birds and what's going on. And right now, when we think about the birdie news, we can't ignore something going on out in the Caribbean and off our Atlantic coast.
That must make a mess. In Haiti, the bird population there, what do they do? What happens?
Well, there's several. Well, first of all, birds are pretty well adapted to these things. And so typically, with the exception of a few species, and some on islands where populations are really low, we've had a couple of incidences of populations being hammered. Or in the southeast, we think about the late 80s and Hurricane Hugo and what it did to populations of an endangered species, the red cockaded woodpecker, and what it did to its habitat. But, we can look at this storm, we can look at Hurricane Matthew. I'm going to call it Matt. We're looking at Hurricane Matt and that thing spinning out there, and we're looking at all the models. And we are first and foremost hoping for the safety of folks. People. And hoping for minimal damage from this storm that's, I think, a Cat 3 right now. But then beyond that, birders, Terry, are a little bit eager to see what Matt spits out in the way of birds.
Really?
Yeah. It sounds a little morose, I know. But birders are, again, we're an odd sort, and we're constantly watching the weather, and we're looking at these forecasts because birds, as my friend Scott Weidensaw would like to say, birds are on the wind. And when we think about these storms and we think about this counterclockwise revolution of these storms, we're looking at birds being spun out. Some birds that we would normally not see over land, birds that might be, miles and miles and miles off the coast, can show up on Lake Hartwell here in the upstate of South Carolina. So, I would suggest over the next few days that birders stay out of harm's way, but that you be on the lookout for odd things, but also for ordinary things that may be reoccurring. So it's migration, right, Terry? Yeah. It's migration, and normally we can kind of predict what birds we're going to see. And one of the things that we will do for our listeners, as we always do, is to provide links and resources for them to better understand the bird world, the bird and natural world. Mm-hmm. So I would like to suggest one. It's Birdcast is a website, and that Birdcast website, which comes through Cornell, in part gives us an idea of what's showing up. And let me tell you, because it uses citizen science, it's using those people, many of which visit your store, right?
Yep.
It's using that citizen science and what we observe on the ground and what we've observed on the ground for a while, and we're connecting it and beginning to get forecasts. So, Terry, I look at the Birdcast website for this week, and it tells me the beginning arrivals, it tells me peak arrivals, and it gives me an idea of what I might expect to see.
We're starting to get new birds now from the north?
Yeah, we're starting to pick up new birds from the north. Now, migration is obviously this seasonal occurrence, and one of the things that I love to do is to think about myself sometimes as a bird on the wind. Many of us have always wanted to be birds, yep. And I would encourage people to imagine themselves as some sort of bird. And birds are always moving. They're creatures of habit, but they're also creatures of necessity, and finding where their habitats are best suited, and to kind of tie to these seasons. So, for example, right now, a great blue heron, which we commonly see, yeah. We get an influx of great blue herons in South Carolina beyond our breeding populations. So right now we're looking at migrants that have been arriving in South Carolina for a little over a couple of months. but we're going to get a peak influx in our region, really, in about a month. And so you may begin to see more great blue herons than you normally see. This week, you can begin to look for a little brown bird, streaked breast, that pumps its tail. You find it on the ground a good bit, called a palm warbler. And palm warblers are Arctic breeders, tundra breeders, and you'll begin to see these birds. I was out a little bit this morning doing some ground truthing, Terry. It's important.
Ground truthing?
Yeah, ground truthing is important. This work that we do is hard work as birders. And so we want to make sure that we are observing along with our listeners. And so we go out and we do the hard work of birding. And I know it's
you work up a sweat. Too,
I do.
Yeah.
It's it's a hard job, but somebody's got to do it. You drag me kicking and screaming to bird. But palm warblers are all over the place this morning. They have been for a while. They've been coming in. But what Birdcast does is it gives you an idea of birds that will be arriving, an idea of peak influx, but then also sort of an idea of how the community is changing.
Yeah.
So, Terry, as people come into your store, as they venture in up in Salem, I mean, you're closer to the mountains than we are down here in Clemson. What are you hearing these days? What are people coming in and telling you about birds in their place?
Most of our birders are concerned about the birds in their backyard. Pretty much, there are a number of guys that like to go out and explore, but most people want to stay in their backyard and attract as many birds as they can. They're talking mostly about the hummingbirds right now and how amazing they are, and they're coming and going, or they have a lot of them, or they don't have any. So it's basically the backyard birds that they're seeing. There's not that many new birds that they're spotting. Well, somebody saw a rose-breasted grosbeak.
Oh, yeah.
Are they migrating through the area?
Yeah, they are. They're migrating through the area, and just an absolutely beautiful bird. One of Audubon's favorite birds. You want to go back away? Yeah. Think about John James Audubon, and here you've got sort of this bird that's a little smaller than a robin, thick bill, black really kind of color on the back, but then the male's this rose colored chest. Bleeding heart is, I believe, what John James Audubon called them. So, but that's a bird that's going to come to your feeder, Terry. That's a bird that's going to come to your feeder. And if you're supplying the right food, especially sunflower seeds and the like, then you're going to get rose-breasted grosbeaks.
Can I play a song?
Yeah, please. What do they sound like?
The way we described it in there is
rose-breasted grosbeak, metallic, long, robin-like whistles.
That's pretty.
That's pretty good. And Terry, that's a song that we would characterize as a warble. And you heard me talk about palm warblers. They're songs which we won't hear a lot of this time of year. We're hearing more chip notes from those birds. But those rose-breasted grosbeaks that the patrons to your store are seeing are birds that are sweeping down from the northeast, from the southern Appalachians. In some cases, the upper Midwest is where those birds are coming from. And those birds are headed to Central America.
Oh, they are. Oh, they're not going to stay around then.
They're not going to stay around for very long. Now, this storm, depending on what our friend Matt does, may determine what some of these birds do. So as folks see these birds in their backyard, and that's an important thing that you brought up, Terry, just how eager so many people are, eager and dedicated to feed the birds, to care for the birds, really, in their backyards. And you've been at this now for 20 years. What's it been like in terms of seeing kind of this growth? I mean, did you start off with just, hundreds and hundreds of people who were watching birds and kind of finding you, or has it grown?
Well, the store's been around for about 4 years, and every year and every month, really, it keeps growing, and we have I don't know, 600-700 customers or something that come regular to our store and buy bird seed and so forth. But it's been an amazing experience with the identifier, which we've been selling through stores and catalogs for the last 17 years since I moved here. We attracted 350,000 customers that bought our product, which is kind of amazing when you think about it. When you start with an idea that's just a nutty idea and then have it work out over the last. And if we added up all the songs that people have bought through our identifier, it's 16 million bird songs.
16 million
that they bought.
Well, Terry, you invented this thing. It's been an innovation that's obviously taken off, that's taken flight. But I think part of what you have to consider is the impact that you've had on conservation, which is significant, I would think. That 350,000 people that you've reached, and then the millions of songs that people get to hear, that they get to push a button and they get to hear a bird song. I think that's pretty incredible.
It has been an interesting experience. I did a survey of our customers and said, by the way, how many people did you show your identifier to? And I had anywhere from 1 to 2,000 people that they showed it to. And I said, the 2,000 are naturalists and interpreters and people at parks who are using it in their programs. But on average, they show it to 15 other people. They love it so much, they want to share it with other people. And it's that when people pick it up, they just say, whoa, that's neat, fun, interesting. I had one person came up to me a few years after I introduced the identifier, and he said, your identifier has had quite an impact on my daughter. I said, oh? And I said, yeah, tell me about it. She came to your booth 10 years ago, and you gave her an identifier to take home. And she was so intrigued with it that she just kept learning and learning about birds. She's gone to college and studied to be an ornithologist.
Wow,
and
bird brain.
Now she wants to be a naturalist as a career. And
how awesome.
What a warm feeling that is.
Well, stories like that are what make birding the passionate pastime that it is, and we really want to hear about your passion for birds. So give us a call at 1-888-539-8859. That's 1-888-539-8859, and talk about birds. And we're hearing stories. We're talking about how some of us come to birding. I've been birding since I was, about 8 years old, I think. And again, it was sort of born out of wanting to be a bird, wanting to fly. But then there are numbers, Terry. You're quoting numbers in the hundreds of thousands and the millions. And when we look at birders across the country, the Fish and Wildlife Service, our U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, has done us a great service by surveying birders and trying to understand who and where they are. So the last survey that was done in 2011 on the tail of our last census tells us that according to the Fish and Wildlife Service data, there are 47 million total birders. 47 million.
Yeah.
So when we think about that, when we think about the tens of millions of people out there that care about birds at one level or another, some of those folks never venturing beyond their backyards, many of those folks in their backyards feeding birds, caring for birds, and then a significant portion of those folks traveling to see birds,
Yep.
then we can think about the impact that birding has on conservation. And so that's one of the stories. So we sort of rejoin our Just Ask Us iteration of our birding show. We want to understand how you out there are observing birds in your backyard and beyond. So give us a call again at 1-888-539-8859.
One of my customers came into the store a couple days ago and said, I saw this white bird at the feeder. No, he didn't have a picture of it, and he said it was fairly small and it had kind of a black stripe. What causes white birds?
Well, more than likely, this is a leucistic bird. So we're looking at white plumage, not a true albino, but we're looking at an aberration in plumage coloration called leucism. And any number of birds, I mean, I've seen pictures, imagine, of white cardinals. So a bird by name that we would think of as typically red, that's white, or mostly white with just tinges of red showing up here and there. And so we're looking at these sorts of these aberrations that occur every once in a while. So one of the things that we want to encourage birders to do is keep your cameras close by your feeders. Even if it's a cell phone, we can take a look at those pictures. We'll be able to get back to you and tell you what those birds are. Did he mention the size of the bird?
He said it was a small bird, smaller than a cardinal, but no, I don't know. Next time I'll get that information.
Well, it's in one of the things that's instructive for our listeners, Terry, is as they make observations to think about the size of the birds, the behavior of the birds, those kinds of things. And one of the things that Patrick and I have always talked about is kind of this bird CSI, this investigation where you're letting your brain sort of be the computer. So as we get callers who think about the birds that they're seeing, thinking about the size of the bird relative to the smallest bird, which is our ruby-throated hummingbird, up to something that's the size of a sparrow, so the sparrows that we might have at our feeders in the upstate of South Carolina, things like chipping sparrows, song sparrows into the winter. We'll get white-throated sparrows. We'll get slate-colored or dark-eyed juncos, And then moving up from that, we can think about a robin. And then up from a robin.
Maybe a mourning dove.
Yeah, exactly,
right.
Exactly. And so thinking about those relative sizes, and then our larger birds, crows. And if you're really lucky, you get something like a pileated woodpecker. That big, handsome bird with that ringing call that we sometimes hear in the woods that kind of reminds us of this great wildness. You got a call for us, Terry?
Yeah, I think I do.
Well,
Not right now.
When I think about all of the birds that we can see and the birds that are visiting our backyards, then it becomes really cool to think about the probabilities that a storm, again, hopefully that everyone's safe, but that a storm might bring in. So we've got a call coming up. We've got our first caller for our new show, and we're going to go to Bob in Seneca, who's going to talk to us about birds. How are you doing this morning, Bob?
Hey, guys, fine. I have a question. It's something I observed about hummingbirds. I've always put out hummingbird feeders and watched them go to the flowers and of course, the sugar water in the feeder. But the other morning, I was out around the house and noticed the hummingbird flying around I guess it was a red tip tree, but it had the old seed pods hanging on. And I noticed he was going up and down the seed pods, pecking at them. Can you talk a little bit about that? It's such an odd occurrence. Was he looking for insects?
Wow, great observation, Bob. And, the thing is that hummingbirds, some of our most popular birds, right? And when we think about the hummingbird that we commonly have here, it's the ruby-throated hummingbird, one of the hummingbirds in the United States, at least, in North America, with the widest distribution. And what Bob saw is a bird being opportunistic and doing what birds really need to do this time of year, and that is get fat. So when we think about our health, no one ever tells us to eat more. Typically, they don't tell you to eat more. We're not a society where people are telling us to gain weight. I don't pay a whole lot of attention to that, and I eat as I will, and so hummingbirds do too. And Terry, I'm sure you have lots of people in the store, maybe Bob at some point, who come looking for things to feed hummingbirds. But some of what nature provides in terms of insects, beyond the nectar that flowers provide, that is waning, quite frankly, for a lot of our plant species now because they're in senescence. So as we move into autumn, we're losing many of our plant species. As these hummingbirds are beginning their migratory route around the Gulf, then many of these birds, and some of these birds across the Gulf, they've got to get fat. They've got to gain weight.
To understand they have to eat within 4 or 5 hours,
Yeah,
or they die.
Yeah, well, it's that metabolism. When you think, you were talking about millions of times and hundreds of thousands. So we think about these hummingbird heartbeats. We're thinking about hummingbird heartbeats in the hundreds of thousands, and we're thinking about wing beats in innumerable counts. And when we think about the weight of a hummingbird, Terry, what do you know about that?
It's a tiny, tiny bird, the weight of a dime, and trying to gain enough weight to be the weight of a nickel. I'm amazed. It flies from our feeders to Florida. They have to bulk up and somehow go across the Gulf of Mexico, fly 20 hours, no land, and can't stop. And they have to make sure the wind is going in their direction, not against them. It's a terrifying, and not only that, they have an amazing GPS system. I can't imagine an engineer designing a machine like a hummingbird.
Yeah, I sometimes wonder what a bird GPS sounds like. And so, Bob, what you're seeing is seeing this miraculous bird feeding on insects, fattening up for this trans-Gulf migration, this nonstop sort of journey that it's got to make to a place that's going to be more hospitable. So in thinking about not just hummingbirds, but any bird that you see this time of year, and understanding that a large part of what they're doing in our backyards or in other places that we see them, a lot of migrants are flying at night. And these migrants are flying at night because weather conditions are better, the chances at predation are decreased, the ability for the birds to navigate celestially, so by the stars and by polarized light and all those things.
Hummingbirds go in packs?
Well, when we think about flocks of birds, we think about sparrows and the like. These birds will move in loose aggregations. You typically don't see flocks of hummingbirds, even though in your backyard, what'll happen. Now let's think about what happens in the backyard. You got to feed her up. You've got to feed her up, and these birds are defending this food source voraciously. So, when you're seeing that, then what you have to understand is that the social behavior of these birds probably isn't conducive to these birds traveling in large flocks. So we think about sort of these loose aggregations of birds, not the typical flocks that we would think of for some birds that tend to be more social. So we thank you very, very much for your call, Bob, and keep watching the birds.
Well, can I ask one more question?
Sure.
I have one other question. Since we talked about the hummingbirds eating insects, is there like a type of suet block, like mealyworms or something, that you could put out that would attract them?
Well, no.
And I'll take your answer off air.
Sure. And
okay.
thanks for being our first call, Bob.
Enjoy it.
Have a good day.
You bet.
Well, Terry, again, when people, I'm sure you get a lot of customers who ask questions about what you can feed birds. And typical for hummingbirds is sugar water.
Right.
So when we think about sugar water and we think about this sort of nectar that we provide in various sorts of feeders, that's what we can provide most for hummers in terms of a food resource. They don't eat suet, and what they're depending on from an insect point of view is typically tiny midges and things like that we may have a hard time seeing. But then beyond that, what do you do for hummers in your yard? What can you do?
Well,
I know you have a beautiful garden at your store.
At the store, we spent a lot of time developing a wildlife habitat there, and one interesting thing about the humming, I talked to a guy that invented a product that you can add to hummingbird nectar that makes it last 3 times longer, like several weeks, and it adds copper, which I didn't understand. That hummingbirds need copper to survive, and he did a study comparing regular nectar, sugar water, and how it ages in a hummingbird feeder and in the sun, and it can maybe last several days, but it all of a sudden gets bacteria in there and it becomes a bacteria soup. And so his additive in there minimizes or reduces that so that the hummingbirds aren't going to get sick. But this is a good time to feed them, as I understand it, because they're going to remember your hospitality, because when they go down to Mexico for the winter and come back, don't they come back to your yard and to your area?
They frequently do, and there are a few people who banned hummers. Bob Sargent, one of them, down in Alabama, and then Mr. Hilton up at Hilton Pond in the Piedmont of South Carolina, up near Rock Hill. And there, what people find is occasionally you'll have recaptures, and you'll have recaptures or recognize birds maybe that you have banded. Now, bands on hummingbirds are tiny. They're absolutely tiny. But birds have these amazing, what we call this amazing sight fidelity. And when we think about sight fidelity, that means, well, you're philopatric. You come back to your home place, so to speak. And so hummingbirds will do that. Now, it used to be that people would take in their hummingbird feeders. They would take in their hummingbird feeders when it got cold because they thought, well, the hummingbird feeder will keep the birds here. And, well, the birds are not only governed by the food resources, but also by light, by day length. And so part of what we see this time of year is we'll see our hummingbirds moving through, so it's important to continue to feed them. But we'll also occasionally pick up some migrants from the west. So birds like rufous hummingbirds that we get every year in the upstate that people have at their feeders, just an absolutely beautiful bird. You mentioned copper. So we have a call. We have a call as we're talking about hummingbirds from Keenan in Salem. How are you this morning, Keenan?
Hey guys, I'm doing pretty well this morning.
Great.
So I have a question about birds and bird watching and learning about birds in general. I wanted to get more involved, and I was wondering what sort of supplies and knowledge do I need to have beforehand going into this?
Great question, Keenan. The first and most essential tool, and I'm going to tell you, you can't do without this. You cannot start birding without this, and it's curiosity.
Interest.
It's interest and curiosity, and so you probably have that in abundance, I'll bet. And so curiosity and this desire to notice is the first thing. But then beyond that, as you go out, you will eventually want to get a pair of binoculars, and you don't have to start with anything very expensive, but you want to start with a good enough pair of binoculars that aren't going to have you dizzy after you watch birds. And those binoculars, you can get good binoculars really for less than $100 from some pretty reputable resources. And so again, we'll try to provide some of those links and some of those things as we go forward in our show. So a pair of binoculars, you want a field guide. You want a field guide that which is just this small book that you can carry with you to help you identify the birds. So, and the birds are listed taxonomically, that is, by the family groups to which they belong. And those binoculars are extensions of your eyes, and the field guide is sort of an extension of your brain. So it helps you to identify the birds that you see. And those are the two most essential. The three,
I'm going to add another one.
Oh yeah,
People.
People, yeah,
friends.
Yes, absolutely.
I got the most out of learning about birds with the bird club and showing up with other people that know a heck of a lot more than I do. And they're fascinating to watch the people as well as the birds identify birds. I got an email from the Clemson Bird Club, and this is a great way to get started. And there's one coming up at 8:00 at the Botanical Gardens at the Geology Museum. And the group that shows up, it could be 4 people, it could be 14 people, all have that same interest in birds and love to have people come up and visit with them and walk with them, stroll through the gardens. What a great place to go birding. But I'd suggest that as well.
Terry, that's absolutely a wonderful suggestion. And as much as we enjoy the birds, birding is often a very social thing. And so anytime you can get together with folks who share the same passion, Keenan, that's important. And Terry's mentioned the Kiwi Clemson Bird Club. There's now a student bird club on campus. There's a Greenville Bird Club. And, we've been talking about numbers this morning. And for our little corner of South Carolina, we're talking hundreds of people who are gathering, not all at one time, but hundreds of people who have this common interest in birds, who are out watching birds. They're doing bird photography. And so I think, those three things, some people who can share their passion with you, a pair of binoculars that help extend your eyes, and a field guide are a great way to get started. And you can do all of those on the cheap. Friends are free, or they ought to be.
Well, and then the other part, you can get more information about it for anybody that wants to follow up with it, is the on Facebook, the Kiwi Clemson Bird Club.
Awesome.
In Facebook.
Awesome way to go.
Another, Keenan, I got to tell you, another one is to follow Drew Lanham on his Facebook page or his blog. If you want to do something from home and work on your computer, you'll see what an amazing birder does and how active he is in taking pictures. You've got, what is it? What's the Facebook? Just Drew Lanham or J. Lute?
Yeah, it's J. Drew Lanham, and it's sort of a way of communicating. Social media has become extraordinarily important, and the technology that we use. So we've talked, Keenan, about these amazing capabilities of hummingbirds, for example, to migrate across the Gulf of Mexico to get to their winter haunt. But then we have technology that helps us sort of span the space and to catch up with time. So there are any number of Facebook groups that you can join. There's a What Bird Is That Facebook group that allows you to sort of learn along with others. But then, that old saying, and I'm saying it's an old saying now, but it doesn't seem like it should be. There's an app for that. There's an app for that. So there are all sorts of apps that you can get on your smartphone or your Apple or your iPhone, and those things allow you to learn, again, relatively cheaply. And as you learn and you kind of have this progression, I'll tell you what'll happen to you as a birder is you'll start picking up more and more things. So, Keenan, I don't just have one field guide. I probably have close to 100. And it's because, there not only are there different field guides for North America, there are field guides literally for, our section of the state that will narrow birds down for you. So that's one of the suggestions I might make, is find a field guide that is pretty narrow in sort of scope, so that you begin to understand the common birds. And so one of the sayings that I have is, when you hear hoofbeats around here, you want to think horses, not zebras. Now, if you're in Africa, you might think zebras. But so the saying for birds is, then if I see a red bird in my backyard and I've studied my field guide and I've sort of been watching from my backyard and it's December and I see a red bird out there, that red bird is probably a northern cardinal. And so you play the probabilities as a birder. And as you learn the common things when something uncommon shows up, so spring rolls around and you look out, maybe you've decided to put a water feature in your backyard, and you look out and there's a red bird in your water feature, but there's no crest. And it's got kind of a big honking bill on it. And you look in your field guide and you more easily recognize that as a summer tanager. So those are the kinds of things that you can do. But I think Terry has an awesome point in that getting together with people who share that passion is important, and it makes it fun. I like to bird both socially, and sometimes I like to bird alone, because it's also sort of, for me, it's kind of feather therapy. You know, Terry, I can get out there, I can relax, and I can have all sorts of things on my mind, but then the birds help me forget it for a while.
Did we answer your question, Keenan?
Yeah. Thank you for all the advice, and I'll be looking forward to starting up.
Well, Keenan, can I ask you a question? What got you interested in birds?
I don't know. Really, it was just being around where I live. There's a lot of birds, and my dad has always been big into nature, and so him being big into that has helped me find a passion for learning more about the birds in my area. So
awesome. Well, keep up the good work, and don't be a stranger. Please make sure that you call us again and talk to us about your progression in this. Sometimes it can become not just a passion, but an obsession. And we'd like to hear how you're getting along, okay?
And stop by my store when you get a chance. We're close by.
Thank you.
Take care, Keenan. Well, Keenan, Terry, called and shared with us, and we'd like for others to call and share with us as we're back on the air, and we'd like for you to just ask us about birds. And you can reach us at 1-888-539-8859. That's 1-888-539-8859 to talk about birds and birding and what you're seeing in your neighborhood when it comes to this wonderful time of year. You know, Terry, I'm back on this birdcast, and I'm thinking about this storm. And I will tell you that tomorrow I was supposed to be in Congaree National Park, our state's only national park that's down in Columbia, South Carolina, or outside of Columbia, to lead a class on fall warblers. Now, Roger Torrey Peterson called them confusing fall warblers. I like to call them amusing fall warblers, because birding should be fun. It should be fun. And that's one of the things that I've loved about knowing you is that you make birding fun. You've had this innovation, and you go to your place up in Salem, and it's a fun place. There's always something new there.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I've been asking this for 3 weeks. I've grown attached to a pair of bluebirds at our store. And
do they have names?
Not yet. Just
okay.
In my heart, but I don't have a name for them yet. I should. And they've been here for 3 years, off and on, and they build nests in a birdhouse that we have right there at the store.
Mm-hmm.
And they've made 12 kids this year. And I feed them live mealworms, whistle for them, and they come out of the trees and they scorf up those mealworms right away. I mean, they're down to they respond in 30 seconds. But they've gone for the last 3 weeks, and it's really sad.
Yeah.
Because I keep going out there and whistling for them, and they don't show up. and they love to show off for my customers when they come in. Do you have any idea what they're doing?
Yeah, we talk about birds being kind of creatures of habit and of season. And one of the things that bluebirds will do, as we look at this time of year, if you're out and about and looking in some of the very birdy places like kind of viney thickets and tangles, you'll see that there's some fruits that are maturing this time of year that are out there. You also have insects and larvae that are out there this time of year. And it's not that they don't like you anymore. So your bluebirds of happiness have not become bluebirds of sadness, but rather that they've just become, they're just out moving around looking for different things.
They had 4 kids this last time, and they fly in as a family to eat the mealworms. And I figured the dad is taking them around the area saying, okay, this is a nice area for you to go to and habitat. They'll probably go up to Lake Hartwell or they'll go to a golf course. And he's showing them the area. I think that's part of what their responsibility is.
Well, that's there's a big word for that. That's it's called anthropomorphism. That it's kind of putting human characters on birds, which sometimes is not a bad thing, and I'll explain. Here, I asked you if the birds had names, and the reason that I ask that is that sometimes, especially our backyard birds, we become really attached to them, and we sometimes will give them names. You know, we'll recognize a particular cardinal, for example, by maybe just a slight difference in its plumage, and we may name that cardinal, and because we sort of name things, we become attached to them. So I don't discourage people from doing that, and that's a little bit controversial. But what I do caution people about is that sometimes we see birds and we want to give them or ascribe our behavior to them. And so I did a lot of research on bluebirds when I was in undergrad. I did a lot of research with bluebirds under a brilliant woman named Patty Gawadi, who really did some groundbreaking research on birds. And let me tell you, it was a soap opera out there. It was a soap opera. And so for bluebirds and the lives that they lead, because they live in these, they will take residence and raise broods in the boxes that we provide. They really provide an excellent opportunity for us to study bird behavior. Your bluebirds will be back.
Okay.
They'll be back.
All right.
And I'm sure they will answer your whistles. I'm not going to whistle right now, but I am going to ask folks if they would give us a call so we can talk birds and birding. My special guest today is Terry Allen, who is the owner of the For the Birds store in Salem, South Carolina, and he wants you to call us at 1-888-539-8859. That's 1-888-539-8859. And so birdie forecast, Matt twirling off the southeast coast. What are we looking at now? We're looking at birds moving in. We talked about palm warblers that were coming in this week. We're going to begin to see raptors on the move. We're seeing broad-winged hawks, many of which have kind of pulsed on by. That's a small woodland hawk that we'll often see in the upstate, in the Piedmont especially. But this time of year, they're moving and they'll sort of coalesce in these huge congregations, especially in Texas and in past migration points. And then they'll get down into Central America, and there will be tens of thousands of broad-winged hawks. What we're going to see this time of year, we're going to start seeing new red-tails that are moving in on winter territory, new red-shouldered hawks that are migrating from points north.
Loons will be here too.
Loons, yes, absolutely, Terry. Loons will begin to take up, and we live in lake country, right? And so that call of the loon, that yodel, that we so associate with the North Woods, with Maine and the UP of Michigan, loons will begin to move in on the lakes soon here. And so as we get loons moving in, as we get new red tails moving in, what we're seeing is sort of this new vanguard.
Great blue heron.
So we're beginning to see these birds.
There it is.
Haunting. Now there you go. And so, you know, at the push of a button, we get a we get a common loon rather. Great Northern Diver is the European name for that bird. But as they move in, as the loons move in, we'll begin to have waterfowl as we move later into the season, into the winter especially. And, when we begin to look at forecasts for birds, the birds that are coming in, it's intriguing because what we do is we can begin, without looking at a calendar, Terry, we can begin to tell the seasons by the birds.
Oh.
And I encourage our listeners out there, I encourage you to pay attention to what's going on in your yard, because as what my grandmother used to call snowbirds, juncos begin to show up, that gives you an indication of the time of year. As you begin to lose your bluebirds, and I'm willing to bet you that most years you probably have this going on. I've had people ask me, they'll have birds disappear, and they'll say, I've had those birds all year. I've had my birds all spring, all summer, and they're gone. What happened? And oftentimes it simply comes down to those birds finding other foods that they need that are out there. And so the nutrients that are provided in things like pokeberry, for example, are absolutely essential to these birds. And the larvae that they'll find, caterpillars and the like, that they'll find on some of this vegetation is critical for them. And so remember, they're in some ways programmed to go out and do these. And so the mealworms that you provide, give the birds easy meals that help them along.
They stay around all winter, though, bluebirds, right?
Yeah, bluebirds will be around all winter. Now, again, part of what we'll get an influx
from the north.
Yeah, we'll get some birds that move in. Bluebirds are short distance migrants typically, but the largest flock of bluebirds that I've seen a bluebird flock of, 60 or 70 birds. And it's quite impressive. But to see that in deep winter, that brings happiness back again, because the bluebirds
Wouldn't that be something?
Are with us. So what makes you happy when it comes to birds? What are you seeing in your backyard that gives you joy? Where do you go beyond the backyard to find bird nirvana? Call us today at 1-888-539-8859, 1-888-539-8859 to tell us what you're seeing, and maybe give us some ideas of what you'd like to hear us talk about in the show. Terry, this show, the Just Ask Us show, is going to be dependent upon what people want to hear, what they want to talk about when it comes to birds. And so we would love to have your ideas on subjects that you'd like for us to cover, on themes, those types of things. I think we're all about conservation, Terry. I think all of us, ultimately, right?
Yeah. I'm interested in, the birding is satisfaction. You're right. It's helping the environment and helping people and helping birds, but it's also a personal satisfaction and helping your soul. I think that has a lot to do with birding. It's just to enjoy the and watching their habits and the fun that they have out there. And so there's a lot of joy to birding.
Well, that whole soul food thing, Terry, I think is important, because, when you talk about why it is we do what we do, why we bird, why a guy would have 100 field guides, why someone would invent something that produces millions of songs that hundreds of thousands of people are attracted to. That's a pretty significant thing. And birding is significant. By the numbers again, almost 50 million birders in the U.S. I can't think of very many lobbies in this political season that are stronger than birders. So that's one of the things that we hope to hear from you on the Just Ask Us show.
The next show's the first Wednesday of next month.
The first Wednesday of each month is how we're starting out. So, set aside a lunch hour, take an early lunch, grab a sandwich, sit by a bird feeder, or find a nice spot outside somewhere and take a little break with your phone and give us a call. and we'll talk to you about the birds that you're seeing. So as we wind down, we would love to have another caller today at 1-888-539-8859 that maybe helps us finish out the day.
I have one call last night from a friend of mine, Josiah, a friend of mine in Missouri, and makes our bluebird houses. And he asked about the mockingbird and what's its song. Of course, a mockingbird is named after a bird that mimics lots of things. But is there an original song that the mockingbird has? Or
Terry, that's a typical, and Josiah, that's a great question. That's also a typical Terry question. What did they first mock? That's a great question. And it's one that we can think about. I've written a poem about that. But I also wonder, when's the last time a mockingbird mocked a Carolina parakeet or an ivory-billed woodpecker? And so thinking about questions like that help tie us to birds. And I think that's a lot of what we're all about, and just understanding how we tie our lives to birds, whether it's the joy of watching them and the soul food that they provide, or whether it's being somehow tied into conservation in a way that helps us see and find more birds as we go forward. So finding birds is important. Having them come to you is important. And I'd really like to thank you, Terry, for all that you've done for birds and birders in the upstate of South Carolina. You're becoming a cult hero, I think, of sorts.
A cult
a cult hero, a birder cult hero. And you're sitting here this morning, almost noon, in your bright colors, almost like a painted bunting.
There you go.
It's absolutely gorgeous thing. So I would like to encourage folks to tune in again on the first Wednesday of each month, when we'll be talking birds and birding on the Just Ask Us show. Patrick McMillan will be back with us, and you can give us a call then. So keep birding, and we will see you soon.
Thank you, Drew, and thank you, Terry. And that is our show for today, and we thank you, too. Today's birding discussion featured Dr. Drew Lanham, a certified wildlife biologist in Clemson University's Department of Forestry and Natural Resources, and Terry Allen from For the Birds. Join us again next week as Clemson University horticulturist Bob Polumsky and his guest take your questions on gardening. Just Ask Us is produced in the studios of Clemson University Broadcast Productions, located at the Madron Conference Center. The mention of specific goods and services in no way implies endorsement by Clemson University or WFBS 107.9 Radio. Neither do the opinions expressed necessarily reflect those of Clemson University or WFBS 107.9 Radio. We invite listeners to respond to our program online through the links at our website, wfbsfm.com, or email us at radio-l@clemson.edu. Just Ask Us is a public service program of Clemson University.